Maybe you don't know.
This time to build. This time to build. Power. This time to build. Power. This time to build. Power. This time to build. Power.
What's up, everybody? I'm your host, Chris Hampton. Welcome to episode 76 of the Power Company Podcast, brought to you by PowerCompanyClimbing.com. I'm here at home in Lander, which is great because I think this is the longest that I've been here for any period of time since I've lived here. And it's pretty damn nice, to be honest. I'm recording this intro while my fiance, Annalisa, and my daughter, Katie, are out in the machine shop climbing. Why am I not out there? Because my A2 is on the mend. Quickly, though, I might add. It's been about 10 days since I injured my A2 pulley in my middle finger, and I'm just about ready to climb on it again. I've been doing some rehab for it. It's going really well, and just about ready. But that's another story for another time, and actually, that's a story for the patrons. I've been detailing my own training in the Don't Call It a Comeback episodes of the We Scream Like Eagles podcast. And I give those to the patrons. I think we're up to 14 episodes at this point. Not all Don't Call It a Comeback episodes, but 14 in total. And some of those short, some of those longer. And you can get access to those for as little as $1 per month, up to really whatever you think it's worth. Yeah. And you can do that at patreon.com/powercompanypodcast. And I'm also solidifying my spring schedule. It's looking a little bit crazy, but that's a good thing. And you'll be hearing more about that as it's nailed down, because if I'm coming to your town, that means I'm going to be having workshops. That means I'm going to be doing private sessions. That means I'm going to be eating tacos. So we should go eat tacos and drink a beer together. So hit me up if you hear that I'm coming to your town. Today's guest, which I'm really excited about, is Dr. Alan Lim, who is a sports physiologist, former cycling coach, author, and founder of Skratch Labs. And if you're not familiar with Skratch Labs started as a hydration company and has grown into a nutrition company, so to speak. And it's natural food. It's real food, and it tastes good. And it's not all about science, even though Dr. Lim is a scientist. He recognizes the human component in all of this, which I really appreciate. And in the spirit of transparency, I've been a Skratch ambassador for a few years. And the reason that I am is that I really truly believe in their products, their philosophy, and their mission. This interview had nothing to do with that relationship, other than the fact that I believe in their products. This was not a requirement. I reached out to them on my own because I believe in this company and what they do. And I think that Dr. Lim has some things to teach us. And man, I was blown away by this conversation. I immediately texted Nate when I was done and said, whoa, I just had this conversation about hydration that was amazing. And most of you who listen regularly know that nutrition talk usually causes me to just blank out. But this conversation is fucking fascinating. And we start with Dr. Lim's origin story. As he says, his parts are from China. He was made in the Philippines, and he was programmed in America, where his parents came to start over again from scratch.
Maybe you don't know.
It's not about all this tech and science if you have an athlete who can't cook food. If you don't have the basic life skills, it doesn't matter the technology that you have or the money that you're spending on these marginal gains.
Power. This time to build. Power. This time to build. Power. This time
Most tyrannical dictators, go. he was one of the worst. And so my parents got the hell out of Dodge. That being said, they had already fled China because of the communist revolution, the Cultural Revolution. As communism goes, well, that didn't exactly work out as, potentially aspirational as that concept is, that we're all basically equal. As a tangent, think about this. Monopoly, this game of capitalism. Everyone starts out with the same amount of money. That's communism.
You have a
How
point.
messed up is that?
You have a point. That's what we're taught from children.
It's freaking weird. Like, you want to play a good game of Monopoly? Take 10 people, give one person
Random amounts of money.
80% of all the Monopoly money.
Yeah, that's way more realistic.
And then distribute the rest and be like, go play.
Yep.
Right?
You have a point. I'm going to try it that way.
Yeah, try it that way. It's insightful. That being said, not to get too tangential, I do believe that this process here in America works, and that's why so many people migrate here. And when my parents first came to this country, they had to give up, who they were and start over literally from scratch.
Right.
And it's this idea that no matter where you find yourself in life, that you can always start from scratch, which is really the core identity and basis for what we do here at Skratch. That's why the company is named what the company is named for. It's not simply that we believe that food and drink is better from scratch. It's the belief that you can reinvent yourself at any point in time. And for me, I had made my career as a sports physiologist on the pro cycling tour. And it was realizing on the pro cycling tour that bottlenecks matter more than marginal gains, that it's not about all this tech and science if you have an athlete who can't cook food, if you don't have the basic life skills to, manage a grocery store, if you're lonely or hungry or angry or tired. It doesn't matter the technology that you have or the money that you're spending on these marginal gains. And so for me, what I learned very early on as a scientist on the pro cycling tour was this acronym that my good friend Lori Ventura uses on her kids, which is HALT. If things are not going well, if someone's emotional, you basically just tell them to halt. And HALT stands for, are you hungry? Are you angry? Are you lonely? Are you tired? Right?
Oh man, my fiance needs that.
Yeah,
for sure. Whenever I'm hungry, I automatically get angry. So
yeah. And then that leads to loneliness because nobody wants to hang around you because you're a dick.
Exactly.
And then all of a sudden you're tired because you've been crying your little eyeballs out because nobody will give you a little Snickers bar.
Yep.
It's a terrible situation.
Yeah, for sure. I think that's really interesting that as a scientist, you paid attention to all those things that a lot of scientists, I think, seem to miss out on. They pay really close attention to the science and don't pay attention to the human. Yeah,
the problem is, and the reason I find that to be messed up is that you're taught as a scientist to be observational, to learn, to observe, to watch, to see what's going on in this little natural world that you're living.
Right.
Not to just be confined to this little micro experiment, right? The thing about practice versus science is that everyone becomes their own experiment. I think that in principle, you can apply the same lessons from the scientific method to everyday life, right? We're all our own experiments. We learn as we go. We're constantly making mistakes and recalibrating.
Yeah.
There's a lot there. And what I found was that it was a lot more beneficial for me to wake up early in the morning, take my little rice cooker and make these guys little energy bars, from sushi rice than it was to force them to, try to chow down all these dry prepackaged energy bars. I found that it was a lot easier for me to just dilute their sports drink and add back more salt than to have them get sick from crappy sports drink. And eventually that led to a lot of the products that we have at Skratch Labs, but I never conceived that this was going to turn into a business. It was just that I found myself in a place in life where I, one, needed a change, but two, the climate in the sport was such that, this is another kind of long backstory. The backstory was that I came into pro cycling and it was a shit show. There was a lot of, not just performance enhancing drug use, there was a lot of coercion around performance enhancing drug use. It's one thing to be an asshole and to cheat. It's another thing to force other people to cheat.
Sure.
It's another thing to be part of a systematic system where you're coerced to do something that you don't want to do. That's a real abomination of freedom, right? It's not just that, oh, I'm a jerk, I'm going to try to take advantage of a system. It's that, oh, I'm
take advantage of everyone else too.
Yeah, and that people are making me or you do something that you feel is morally wrong. That is the real rub of the situation. And so, young, naive, idealistic, and traumatized by what I had seen, I wanted to try to make things better. And
believing in this American dream that's possible.
Yeah, exactly. And so I took the approach of saying to athletes, look, if you've cheated, you've cheated. How about we do things differently? How about we use your past experiences as a reference point to doing things better? And maybe, just maybe, you might find as your own experiment that you do better, not cheating. How about that as a proposition? How about you train really, really hard and you come home a lot more tired, but when your head hits the pillow at night, you can actually fall asleep and you sleep like a little baby rather than laying up waiting until people find you out.
Right.
And that approach, I think, created a lot of success. It helped spawn the biological passport through the Garmin cycling program. It changed a lot, but mostly what it changed is it changed the systematized doping that I think was going on. Certainly athletes were still cheating, but it wasn't like there was a gun to their head anymore. There were other options and other teams that had
I think it's those other options that's really important. If everyone who's winning is cheating, then you feel like to compete at all, you have to cheat as well.
Yeah. Monopoly.
Yeah, exactly.
Shit. Anywho, that eventually led me to Radio Shack, which was Lance's team, Lance Armstrong's team, and the federal investigation began, and essentially, by association, the gig was up for me. There was a cooling off period, if you will, where people, I think, weren't sure what to make of me because I was working for Lance and his team.
Right.
So I had a lot of time on my hands, and I realized that, maybe I wasn't ever going to work in pro cycling again. On one hand, that made me pretty bitter. It felt really unfair. On the other hand, such is life, and such is, trying to do the best that you can do. Sometimes it doesn't work out. But athletes were asking me for the sports drink that I had been making for them.
Right. And it was, at the time, it was called the secret drink mix or something. That's how they referred to it.
It wasn't even called secret drink mix. We were just making it for the guys. It started becoming called secret drink mix when I was no longer working in pro cycling, and we were making the stuff literally in a paint shaker at the local hardware store.
Right.
Me and Ian McGregor, who's now our CEO. Ian was a former pro cyclist who had an injury. He couldn't race anymore, and I remember sitting with him, weighing out the options, and, my at least sentiment to him was like, look, you're a white dude who speaks English. Like, get over yourself. You're going to be just fine.
Yeah.
Like, you're not working in a factory.
Right.
Cycling is not the only thing that
the system was built for you.
Yeah. You can get an education, you can learn things. I'm like, look, dude, you can subtract really well. Like, you've got a fantastic brain. And he went back to school to get a degree in mechanical engineering. He graduated first in his class. And in the meantime, he started helping me make drink mix, and, was always kind of my right-hand man in terms of thinking about what I was doing. And he learned at such a great pace, so much faster than I was learning, that, it was clear that he needed to be the CEO of this company and be the leader here. So Ian and I were making drink mix. We were bagging it up and putting a little secret sticker on it. Was there ever
any like concern about the drink mix, since it was at this time when there was this federal investigation into doping in cycling? Was there ever anyone who said, wait a minute, what's going on with this drink mix?
Well, yeah, people tried to snort it all the time. We had, guys mixing it up and syringing it in between their toes. Yeah. Cause fuck, it's a bag of powder. Like if you don't have a spoon and a lighter, what are you supposed to do with it?
Man.
Not everyone is a total idiot.
Yeah.
If there was concern, certainly we were probably breaking most food laws.
Mm-hmm. In the paint shaker.
You don't exactly make a food product in a paint shaker. But we did learn that under a certain volume of sales, this is pretty much a lemonade stand. This is this is a bake sale at your local elementary school. So we kind of bake sailed our way into this whole thing. It was a very slow process, I think, even though you look back on it now and it happened very quickly, of realizing that this had potential, but more importantly, realizing that we were helping people. And for me, my inspiration comes when I know that I'm able to help someone and when they're grateful for that. And we were getting a lot of emails from people we didn't even know who are now coming to the Secret Drink Mix website saying that, the drink mix really helped them, that it was something that they could actually use and not get sick from. And that bolstered us. And it gave me a sense of purpose, a sense of meaning, and some hope that I could also reinvent myself. Ian was reinventing himself. I had a college roommate named Aaron Foster who came on board, and Aaron was reinventing himself. And so we were all kind of looking to the future and looking to our own possibilities.
Yeah, starting from scratch.
And we changed the name from Secret Drink Mix to Skratch when we realized that name was disingenuous and it wasn't really what we wanted to do. We didn't want to play some rogue game. We were really making fun of pro cycling when we called it Secret Drink Mix.
Right.
But, while I'm all for being funny and humor is a great way to kind of get through challenging times, we didn't want to be funny about the fact that, we were serious about starting a company and getting this thing going. So, we hunkered down. We took the money that we made from Secret Drink Mix and we created a whole new identity and sat down and talked about our beliefs and about what this meant to us. And, Ian's wife, Jen, was our first employee. Our employee after that was Jason Donald, who was also on the Garmin Pro Cycling team, and got our friends together and we just started. Didn't bring on any, outside money. We figured, it was Aaron who had this fantastic plan. He was like, okay, what we're going to do, guys, is we're going to sell 100 pounds and we're going to take the money, we're going to put it in a thing called the bank. And we're going to take that money, we're going to make like 300, 400 pounds. We're going to sell that. We're going to repeat the cycle until we're making more and more. And, he looks at Ian and I and he's like, but there's only one rule. We can never spend more money than is in the bank.
That's a good rule to have.
It's a great rule. It's a great metric. And so we were effectively profitable from day one.
Great.
Have been evolving and growing ever since.
Yeah. So at that time, when you're in pro cycling, you're a scientist at a time when chemicals are kind of ruling everything, not just the illegal chemicals either, but science is looking for a better supplement, a better drink mix, a better whatever.
Yeah.
How do you go from let's find the next best chemical to why don't we just use real food?
Well, I think that one thing that was happening at the time that was a very strong influence was this was the time when the slow food movement as a whole in society was taking shape. And so I don't think that we really invented anything new in sport. We were taking cues from society as a whole. Michael Pollan has just written his book, and he opens up, his book with "Eat real food, mostly plants, not too much of it,"
right? And
kind of summarizes that whole movement in a sentence or in three sentences. So for us, it just made sense. More importantly, you got to remember that while pro cycling is very technocentric, it is based in an ethnocentric culture, right? Meaning it's based in a culture, a European culture, where tradition rules, where you have the Tour de France in France, where commensality or eating together at a dinner table is still the primary driving cultural force. Our team was based in Catalonia, Spain, which is another one of these kind of paradoxes of, high fat foods, strong community, lower rates of heart disease. Right. You have these beautiful farmers markets, and all it really took was getting the athletes and riders to go to those markets, to pick up some of those foods, to form relationships within that community, to understand how much better that worked. I think that, in the technocentric world, we tend to isolate a lot, right? We tend to be alone a lot. We tend not to eat together a lot. I saw a lot of loneliness in pro cycling, pro sports in general. And one of the, best remedies for that loneliness is sitting together with your friends and sharing a meal and having a community that holds you accountable to a set of beliefs.
Yeah, I think that's a really important aspect of performance as well.
Absolutely.
And one that doesn't get talked about is just this feeling good about yourself and who you are, and being happy in general.
Yeah,
is a huge part of performing well at whatever it is you're doing.
Yeah. It's as simple as this. You know how you go and get coffee and, you bump into people at the coffee shop and people know your name. It's like the Cheers effect, right?
Right,
Norm!
totally.
And the barista knows you and knows what your drink is. I mean, something as simple as that starts your day off fundamentally better than, when you're in the middle of, suburban who knows where at generic Starbucks, just trying to get through the line. Right. And for me, this is why I kind of loathe the trade shows and a lot of the business travel I do, because it is incredibly lonely. It is incredibly isolating because you don't have that sense of connection to the person next to you.
Right.
You
end up having the same conversation over and over and over with every person you meet.
That's right.
There's nothing genuine.
That's right. And for an athlete who is so focused on performance, training all day long by themselves, coming home, eating by themselves, being in their head all day long, being maybe in a foreign place where, they don't innately call it home and they don't have that connection. Holy cow, you start to go stir crazy. More importantly, you get so focused on trying to achieve your goals that you start to lose touch with the values that initiated those goals, right? That's pretty dangerous. So, for me, a lot of what I did in pro cycling in terms of creating community, getting people to eat real food was kind of one and the same, right? And it just made sense, and it seemed foundational. So we still talked about science. We still were looking for innovation. We were still, bringing athletes into the wind tunnel and, quantifying data and trying to be as intelligent about the process as possible. But I think that we have forgotten that, there has to be this foundation. There has to be this table that we sit at. From there, you can evolve the conversation.
Yeah. And I think that's something Skratch does really well, as having been involved with Skratch for a number of years now, since actually Jay Peary sent me Skratch when he first signed in with the company. And at the time I was just writing a blog, and I don't pay much attention to claims that packaging makes or anything like that. So I hadn't even connected that this is real fruit that this is made with. And I have a bad habit of leaving water in my water bottles for days. And just drinking it anyway. And I went to take a drink of Skratch that had been sitting there for days. And I'm like, what the hell is that?
Did it ferment?
It had totally fermented. And then it connected in my brain like, oh, this is real food. This is amazing. And then the whole community aspect of it started showing up. It took a little bit, from the time that I learned about Skratch for that community aspect to show up, but it really is showing up. And I think that's something you do really well.
Oh, thank you. Well, first and foremost, if there's anything that I want people to know about Skratch Labs, it's that we're a food company. We're not a supplement company. And a company is a food company under the jurisdiction of the FDA when you look at the nutrition label on the back and it says nutrition facts. When it says supplement information, that's a supplement company.
Gotcha.
As a nutrition company, we actually can't make any claims on our bags. We can only state what the product is or intended for, right? So sport hydration drink mix, right? We can't make any claims that this is going to make you any better of a person or that it's doing this or that. It's just a food product. But a supplement company can. And a lot of people often tell us, well, why don't you tell people more about all the benefits? And I'm like, well, it's because we're a food company. And as a food company, it's not like you can take a banana and be just like, loaded with potassium.
But you've built this community who can tell the other people the benefits.
That's right. And I think the community built itself in so much that we needed help, and we needed a lot of help. We didn't have a lot of money to spend initially. And so our friends in this Boulder community came out and helped us. We would have these, kind of sticker parties where we'd order a bunch of pizzas. People would show up to the office and they would start putting stickers on these silver bags of Skratch because we didn't have enough labor or help. And we would have to do this every 2 or 3 weeks to keep up with sales. And people would just show up. I mean, we'd get like big parties, 50 to 100 people would show up a night and just sticker bags with us.
Yeah.
Well, when we first started marketing, we would stand on the corner of Highway 36 and Broadway and hand out samples to the cyclists who rode by. And I started paying some of the panhandlers on the corner to help. And eventually the cops shut me down. But when that happened, one of the buyers from Whole Foods here on the Pearl Street store, he had ridden by, tried the product, and called us up and said, hey, we'd love to put you in Whole Foods.
Oh, right? Cool. Yeah.
So if it wasn't for that community kind of watching our back, helping us out, there's no way that we would have been here. And that camaraderie meant something, right? And it moved the needle for us in a big way when we realized we didn't have any money to go to events to market our products. Bijou Thomas, who owns Bijou's Little Curry Shop, is a good friend who I wrote the Feed Zone cookbooks with. He was like, Al, we can buy a food trailer, drive around the country, and I bet you we can sell enough burritos and bowls to pay our way. And we took a big risk. Bijou and I, went on the road. He's Indian, I'm Chinese, and it was literally Harold and Kumar looking for White Castle, selling rice bowls.
Oh, that's amazing.
And we made a lot of cash that helped to support our marketing efforts. More importantly, we realized by just giving someone some good food and some good conversation and having a place to hang out, anywhere, you created instant community.
Yeah.
Right. The table was everything.
That's really cool. Can we talk a little bit about, the product and why? So first off, I have a really bad habit of when I start working or when I'm out climbing or whatever it is I'm doing, I get so focused on the thing that I forget to eat or drink.
Yeah.
Bad habit. My fiance calls me out on it all the time.
Sure.
Trying to get better at it. One of the things that has helped me is I did grow up with a sweet tooth.
Yeah.
And I've weaned myself mostly off of that over a lot of years. And things like Gatorade and things like that are too sweet for me. They trigger that sweet tooth, and then I need more candy, more sugar,
Yeah.
But Skratch is subtle enough and doesn't trigger that sweet tooth, but it makes me remember that I want to drink water.
Yeah, sure.
Or that I want to drink whatever's in my bottle at the time,
And that may actually be more physiologic than anything. So first and foremost, it's important for people to know that our primary focus here at Skratch is to solve problems for endurance athletes. Specifically solve nutrition problems for endurance athletes. Our bigger mission or our bigger why is to help people become better. And I'm a firm believer that if you participate in any type of somewhat aerobic activity, If you see yourself as an athlete, in particular, if you see yourself as an endurance athlete, whether you're a mountaineer or a climber or a firefighter or someone who just stands all day on their feet working their butts off, you're an endurance athlete, right? And in the context of being an endurance athlete, you have certain problems and challenges. In that sense, you think about something like sugar and you think about something like salt, which are primary ingredients in our sports drink. We don't put those ingredients there because people want them. We put them in there because they need them.
Gotcha.
So effectively, we provide sugar to athletes who need sugar, not to people who simply crave it.
Right.
Right. So, in comparison, we talk about our sugar concentrations as percentages. Skratch is a 4% concentration, meaning it has 4 grams of sugar for every 100 mils of fluid. Gatorade is somewhere in the 6 to 7% range, right? Coke, 10 to 11% sugar. Orange juice, maybe as high as 11 or 12% sugar, right? Yep. So we're on the very low spectrum of how much sugar you need for 2 purposes. One is to help maintain your blood glucose as you're exercising and burning calories. Mm-hmm. That can help performance, having this exogenous or external source of fuel. The other thing it helps with is if you pair that sugar with sodium. The combination of glucose and sodium, when transported through an active transport system, creates a portal which draws water in. Right. So for
so it hydrates you better.
It hydrates you faster. You get faster absorption. Normally water moves across the small intestine through a process called osmosis, dependent upon the concentration gradient between what's inside the intestinal lumen and the blood. So if you have something that is too concentrated, water will tend to move into the gut. If you have something that is less concentrated than blood, water will move into the body. But if you transport 2 molecules of sodium for every molecule of glucose, you can move in 210 molecules of water. So there is a physiological basis for enhancing water absorption with glucose and sodium. The other thing that's happening is we're replacing the salt that you're losing in your sweat. People aren't really aware of how much salt they lose. They're not even aware that they're very salty people, right? If you think about our blood and why vampires love drinking blood. Mm-hmm. Well, it's because blood is about the same salinity as a bowl of chicken noodle soup.
Oh,
right?
Okay.
So blood is about 3,500 milligrams of sodium per liter. A good bowl of miso soup, chicken noodle soup, is about 4,000 milligrams of sodium per liter. So just a little bit saltier, right? And it's all that salt in your blood that is ultimately presented to a sweat gland. As the sweat moves through that sweat gland, your body tries to save as much salt as possible. So it tries to resequester both sodium and chloride ion. But some of that salt escapes.
Sure.
And how much salt escapes is dependent upon your sweat rate. It's also dependent upon your genetics. From a genetic standpoint, there's a huge variability to the extent that maybe some people lose 400 milligrams of sodium in a liter of sweat. Some people might lose 2,000 milligrams of sodium in sweat. On average, it's about 1,000, or about a third of what you find in blood. In the most extreme case, you have cystic fibrosis, where a cystic fibrosis patient is going to lose most of their salt, up to 3,500 milligrams of sodium per liter. Sodium is critical for every single electrical current flowing through your body. Your brain can't talk to any organ or muscle without sodium. And so it's really, really important to keep sodium balance, or the concentration of sodium, consistent inside your body. So as you sweat and you lose salt, if you don't replace it, you're kind of screwed up. That being said, you're losing more water than you are losing salt.
Right.
If you lose this water, what happens to your blood sodium concentration?
Goes up.
It goes up, right? You're losing more water out of the pool than chlorine, so the chlorine concentration is going up, right? Same with the body, the sodium concentration is going up. This triggers the thirst mechanism, okay? And while the thirst mechanism has some lag, it's still a great mechanism because it's a mechanism that isn't just responding to changes in body water. It's really responding to changes in sodium concentration. The idea being that as you lose water and that sodium concentration goes up, you get thirsty.
Gotcha.
If you were to drink plain water, you stop being thirsty when the sodium concentration goes back down to normal, not when you replace all the water. And that thirst mechanism is really important because it protects you from diluting out your blood sodium concentration. If you listen to thirst, you'll stop drinking when sodium balance has been reestablished. If you drink beyond thirst, there's a good chance that you're going to dilute out your blood sodium and get something called hyponatremia, right? Which is a diluted blood sodium level.
Right.
And that can cause a lot of different problems. I mean, the first problem it probably causes you to pee a lot, right? Because now your kidneys are actively trying to balance sodium, right? So what's great about a sports drink, if you get it right and you're close to what you're replacing in terms of salt loss, is all of a sudden thirst theoretically becomes a good benchmark for not just maintaining sodium balance, but also maintaining water balance, right? Because now you're not only replacing the salt that you lost, but you're replacing more of the water that you actually lost.
Right.
So having salt in your water bottle is critical to maintaining hydration. It's just important for people to realize that hydration is about two things. It's about water balance.
It's not just about water.
Yeah, it's also about sodium balance. And of those two, water versus sodium balance is more important than water balance.
That's really interesting. I've never heard it put that way, but that makes a lot of sense, especially when you consider that it's all electrical signals that run us.
That's right.
And that has to move through our bodies via this sodium.
Yeah, and it's all about homeostasis. It's all about a constant body environment. It's all about keeping the same temperature, keeping the same blood sugar, keeping the same electrolyte concentration. Everything is about this idea of homeostasis or balance, right? And so your body has what's referred to as hedonistic cues, right? You get hungry, you eat. That's hedonism. Hedonism is often thought about pursuing pleasure, but it's also about maintaining life. And in a lot of ways, there's a tight association between, staying alive and seeking pleasure, right?
Yeah.
When you're cold, you put on a jacket. When you're hot, you strip naked and you start running around, like most people do. Right?
That's what happens here at Skratch.
That's what happens here at Skratch. We get hot and bothered all the time.
Sticker parties.
Yep, that's right. That's right. When I don't know, when you go through puberty, all of a sudden you're like, oh my gosh, I want to make babies.
Right.
But you really don't want to make babies. You just want to.
Right. Totally.
But it's all biology.
Yeah.
And so, when you think about something like Skratch, we're not simply trying to make you crave a product. We're trying to trigger the right mechanisms in your brain so that intuitively you do a better job of taking care of yourself. So while you might say that you do a bad job of drinking or eating or whatever, if you have the right food, if you have the right drink, you're intuitively going to survive.
Right.
And intuitively going to continue to perform at a very high level. Right?
Okay.
It's when the stuff that you're providing yourself sucks or isn't in balance with what you're losing that I think things start to go a little off the rails.
So do we know, is there a number or a ratio or something that for this amount of activity or exercise, you should be having this much? Or is that something we shouldn't even consider? We should just go
Don't even worry about it, dude.
Thirst.
Go by thirst.
Okay.
And make sure that you know what you're losing. You're losing water, you're losing salt, you're burning calories. You got some calories, you got some salt, you got some water. Well, bring it with you and you'll do better than if you had not. You'll be able to go harder and farther. And when you reach your limit and you're interested in going past that limit, rethink what you brought out. Did you bring enough water? Did you bring enough salt? Did you bring enough food? And it becomes this effectively a trial and error process. But if you keep good notes and you listen to yourself, then you're being a little smarter than just trial and error. You're starting to actually move towards experimentation.
Right.
You're moving towards what science is supposed to be. So in that sense, I don't think that there's ever a hard and fast rule about how much you quote unquote should bring in terms of these items. I think that it's important to know what good reference points are. So on average, in the heat, an athlete who is working very, very hard, let's say they're fit enough to run a 4-minute mile. If you're fit enough to run a 4-minute mile and it is over 80 degrees out, over 50% humidity, you're losing, if you kept that pace up for an hour, probably anywhere from 2.5 to maybe even 4 liters of fluid, depending upon your body shape and size, right? And so there are so many factors that we can't measure that play a physical role in your body's balance. So literally, if you are tall and skinny and you have a lot of surface area relative to your, active muscle mass, you're going to dissipate heat a lot better than somebody who is more Mr. Potato Head.
Right.
And so Gumby compared to Mr. Potato Head is going to have probably a lower water need for a given, caloric expenditure than Mr. Potato Head will. Depending upon whether or not the clouds are out, or there's solar radiation, or if it's windy or not windy, the humidity, the temperature, your physical conditioning, your state of adaptation.
Right.
There's so many factors that play in that if you can't rely on what your body is telling you and improvise, then you're kind of screwed. That being said, the best improv people I have ever seen are the ones who have a lot of training. Right?
Sure.
So if you're an actor who can improv, it's probably likely that you were a classically trained actor with a huge toolbox to understand your environment and your situation.
Yep.
Right. And in competitive settings, you have no other option, even if you have a good strategic plan, but to be improvisational, because everyone has a good strategic plan.
Yep.
And you got to kind of look at your environment and say, all right, how do I continuously adapt so I get the best result?
Yeah, I think that's really important. We preach quite a bit practicing all of the factors and having a great awareness of all the factors outside of what you do in the gym and what your training plan tells you to do or any of that. And,
That's right.
And that all plays a big part in how you perform, how you feel, how long you continue in the sport, all sorts of, it affects the whole being, really.
Yeah. Well, what I find really, really cool is that the more you train, the more you engage and challenge, the more you find yourself in difficult situations, not only do you get better, but you get to a point where you start to learn that you can trust yourself.
Yeah.
That your body is really, really flexible.
Yeah.
And while your body might have limits, it's also really, really resilient.
Yeah.
Right?
And then you can push more and more.
That's right.
Little bits at a time.
Yeah. You find the line, you find the line, you find the line. And, the best way to learn is to cross the line.
Yeah. So you guys have a sport mix and an anytime mix.
Yep.
If we're just listening to thirst, why does it matter to have two different mixes? As a climber, I prefer the anytime mix.
Yeah.
Because we don't do a lot of heavy aerobic exercise.
Yeah. So the difference between the anytime and the sport is sodium. The anytime has a lot less sodium and a lot less sugar and more fruit than the sport does. Here's the difference. When we're just hanging out, sitting here, talking, etc., we're losing water, right? But we're losing most of that water through respiration, which is insensible. Some of it is coming off the skin, but it's coming off at such a slow rate that our sweat glands have plenty of time to resequester the sodium. And so for just sitting around, we lose water, but we don't lose any electrolyte. In that sense, when you're talking about thirst, water becomes perfectly appropriate to restore both electrolyte balance and water balance, because as I'm losing this water over the course of a day, my sodium concentration is going up. But since I only lost water, if I just drink water to the thirst and I lost a liter, I'll stop being thirsty at a liter. When we get into this mixed bag of activity where we're kind of walking around, we're not quite exercising to the extent that we're losing 2+ liters an hour. So we're not like running a marathon, but still physically active, then the sodium loss ends up becoming less. And so I think that you've naturally found that anytime works well for you because it has just enough electrolyte to keep up with your losses over this mixed activity.
Yeah.
And you're not losing at the rate that you would be if you were constantly sweating. So if you're doing an activity and you know that the sweat is not going to stop, you want to use our sport hydration drink mix.
Right.
If you're doing a mixed bag of activity or in the office, you want to use our anytime. And that balances or matches water to sodium loss.
Right. And then where does the, what's it called? It's not the hyper mix, but there's another
The rescue?
one. The rescue.
Yeah.
Yeah. Where does that come in?
We have effectively 3 kind of major categories in our company. We have our Anytime line of products, which includes our Anytime hydration drink mix. It includes our Anytime energy bar. These are products that you can use basically anytime if you're hungry or thirsty, etc. And they're appropriate for mixed or sedentary activity. Then we have our sport line, right? And that's when you're doing this consistent aerobic endurance type of work. Mm-hmm. And then there's our wellness line. And we've gone through this whole kind of renaming architecture because I would make products and just give it a name. So our wellness used to be called Rescue Hydration. That's based on a formula by the World Health Organization for treating severe dehydration, specifically in the cases of diarrheal disease. This is the same formulation that you would see with a product like Pedialyte, right? So you have a very high sodium product, about 1,500 milligrams of sodium per liter. You have higher potassium, about 500 to 700 milligrams of potassium per liter. You have a little bit of zinc because zinc has been shown to help to quell the intestinal viruses that can often lead to diarrhea. You have, a little bit of sugar because that combination of glucose and sodium helps to enhance water transport.
Right.
So UNICEF and WHO have done a great job of updating and delivering this education and information to folks. This is all public domain knowledge. And the reason why it's public domain knowledge is because in developing countries, the leading cause of death is dehydration from diarrheal diseases, and it's easily preventable. The link between this situation and endurance athletes is that endurance athletes can at times become severely dehydrated.
Sure.
Endurance athletes often travel a lot and they pick up a lot of intestinal bugs and, they end up peeing out of their butthole, right? Mm-hmm. And so having a good oral rehydration solution ends up being critical in the same way that we created a natural alternative to the neon colored sports drinks. We wanted to create a natural alternative to the neon colored and artificially sweetened pediatric electrolyte solutions. Even though they're designed with children in mind, they're also great for adults. The reason why they're designed for children in mind is because an adult has a lot more total body water and electrolyte on board. And so when they have diarrhea or become severely dehydrated, they're less likely to die from it than a small child.
Sure.
Right. And so the hydration, especially, the sodium balance in a kid becomes much more crucial than it does in a mature adult. And that's why there's been an emphasis in calling these pediatric electrolyte solutions. But in reality, they're all just oral rehydration solutions or salts.
Gotcha.
And that's what our wellness or rescue hydration is. And then finally, we have a hyperhydration, which is equivalent to saline. And so all of our hydration drinks are kind of characterized by differences in sodium level. So when you get to hyperhydration, now you have something that is exactly saline, and you have something that is essentially drinkable saline, right? So, if you think about the trend towards IV hydration and people being hungover and thinking they need IV hydration,
right.
And you think about trying to push all that saline fluid through a little vein, through a little hole, versus the small intestine, which has the surface area of a tennis court, or a football field, you would rather pour a liter over that football field than try to shove that liter through a little needle.
Yeah.
So for me, the only time IV hydration over our hyperhydration or our saline hydration is important is when somebody is throwing up, right? If you're not throwing
so they can't
up,
keep that solution down.
Yeah, exactly. If you have diarrhea, then oral rehydration, especially with the high salt, moderate sugar solution with some zinc and maybe even some probiotic. If you're throwing up, well, you're not even keeping it down. So that's when you start to think about IV hydration in cases of severe dehydration.
Okay, so both of these you would use in similar situations.
I would use the hyper in situations where I know I'm not going to be able to get enough fluid. I'm going out into the heat and I just can't carry enough water and salt.
So you would use it pre.
Yeah, and I would use it as a way to increase my total body water and the sodium in a way where, because it's saline, you're going to pee less of it out. And you're going to basically top yourself off. You're going to allow your body to carry as much water and sodium as it possibly can. The risk is if you don't need that, you're just going to drive blood pressure up. And if you're hypertensive already, then that's a risk factor. But if you're an endurance athlete who's going out into the Mojave and you have a limited amount of resource you can carry, well, this is where prehydrating becomes very important. But you don't want to just prehydrate with water, because if you prehydrate with water, you're going to pee most of that water off.
Right.
You want to prehydrate with something that is the same concentration as your blood. And even then, there are limits as to how much water your body will hold. Again, remember that saline is close to a good soup. So you can also prehydrate with good broths, salty soups, right?
Interesting.
And use that as a strategy. It doesn't there are alternatives there, and it doesn't necessarily replace just drinking water with a good salty meal. Wow,
that's really fascinating. I had no idea of any of this. But
yeah, it's pretty simple when you break it down. But I like to say that the human body doesn't come with a user manual.
Yeah, it doesn't.
Right? And so when you start to read the user manual, you start to realize, oh, this is a pretty elegant system. We need fuel, we need oil.
Yeah,
we need to pump up the tires.
Yeah, totally.
We're good to go.
Yeah. So where does the recovery mix fall into the wellness side?
It falls into the sports side because it's got a very high sugar concentration to maximize glycogen resynthesis. Mm-hmm. It has a little bit of protein to help with that process as well. It's basically chocolate milk or coffee milk.
I was a little blown away by it, actually.
Yeah.
I've never been a fan of adding water to my whatever recovery mix or protein drinks or any of those things. Yeah. And I've always been a chocolate milk fan as a recovery drink. And I tried adding the water, even though I really wanted to add milk.
Yeah.
And it tastes exactly like chocolate milk.
Because it is chocolate milk. And that was the epiphany that I had reading the scientific literature on maximizing recovery. There's so much literature on chocolate milk compared to other recovery drink solutions. And there's not a piece of literature that I've read that shows that chocolate milk doesn't work as well, if not better. And, it serves two purposes. One is it helps you to begin rehydrating, but then because chocolate milk is typically so sweet, it helps you to refuel. That being said, people think of chocolate milk in the context of a snack. In most cases, it's not an appropriate snack because you just don't need that much sugar, right? And so again, we're providing this high dose of sugar to people who actually need it. I tell people that it's not a wellness or an anytime product, it's a sport product, assuming that you just burn a lot of calories and you don't have enough time to cook yourself a meal. Yeah. So even in this situation, I see that there are other alternatives, and I would rather give a kid a bowl of chicken fried rice than have them drink this super sweet chocolate milk. What I do know, though, is if they have another event in 2 or 3 hours, or if they have an event the next day, that I'm going to give it to them because it's going to fast track that refueling and that recovery process. And that's ultimately critical from a performance standpoint. The problem with chocolate milk, though, is not everyone can drink chocolate milk. Some people are lactose intolerant.
Right.
And so we use a complete whole milk protein. 20% of the sugar is going to be lactose. To make up for that, we add lactase enzyme to our chocolate milk. And so in our product, if you shake it up and let it sit for about a minute, the lactase will start to break down the lactose, and people who are lactose intolerant can now drink the product.
Okay.
So I think we have an advantage over chocolate milk in the sense that it is a complete milk protein product, but we're adding back lactase enzyme in the same way that like milk products like Lactate or other lactose-free milk products do. The other thing we do is we add a probiotic called Bacillus coagulans 30, BC30. It's a lactate-forming probiotic, meaning when it metabolizes, it forms lactate as a byproduct. And it's also a spore-forming bacteria, meaning it's protected by a hard protein shell, which makes it very resilient to high temperatures, UV radiation, to stomach acid. And so you get a higher percentage of survival through the stomach into the small intestine. There's a ton of research on these bacillus probiotics, these spore-forming probiotics, as being immunoprotective, having great effect in terms of improving digestion inside of the small intestine, helping to create vitamins and helping to actually break down protein and carbohydrate. And so as a digestive aid, as a immune enhancer, it's a very, very powerful probiotic. And so we add both lactase and the BC30 probiotic to our recovery product.
Wow. These things are so much more than just tasting good.
Yeah. And that's the thing. For me, taste drives everything, but there is a functional role or a real problem that we are solving.
Right.
Immunosuppressed athlete post-exercise, and every athlete who works out hard in the period of time post-exercise as they're recovering is immunosuppressed. So it makes a lot of sense that the first barrier to that immune function, first physical barrier besides your skin is your small intestine, right?
Yep.
And so you want to protect that. You want it to heal and recover. And there's a big stress on the GI tract during exercise, especially in the heat. Your intestinal membrane can begin to fail, and it gets more susceptible to viruses or bugs or other insults. And this is where athletes often talk about having a bad gut or a bad intestine post-exercise. So we look at the literature, we say, hey, what works best? Wow, chocolate milk really works. Why complicate the situation? But what are the limitations and what are other problems that athletes are facing? Well, not everyone can drink milk, lactase. There's still this issue of immune function and a healthy gut. Well, let's add, what we think is the best in class probiotic for that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And one problem that it solves for me is that when I go out cragging for a whole day, I don't want to pack a cooler and bring chocolate milk leave it sitting in my car in the sun. And, and then I don't really want to stop at the store to buy some. So I can bring this powder, and I always have water. So I can just mix it with water, and
you don't need
that's
to bring
super
milk.
helpful for me. Yeah.
And in so much that powder drink mixes don't tend to serve the mass market community very well, because you can't stop at a 7-Eleven or a grocery store, or the airline kiosk and just pick it up.
Yep.
It serves endurance athletes and outdoor women very, very well.
Yeah.
In that it's portable.
Yep.
And you just need water.
Yeah.
Right. And you're set. So for us, that's another kind of conscious decision that maybe limits our market, but allows us to stay very, very focused on this idea of solving nutrition problems for athletes.
Yeah. While we're on the topic of this recovery mix, I just have to ask, we were sitting at home next to the fireplace a few weeks ago and realized we had no hot cocoa in the house, but we did have Skratch Recovery. So we were making recovery cocoa. Yes. And we ended up doing it multiple nights that week because it was so good. Is there any problem with that?
There's no problem compared to cocoa. And in fact, the next time you run out of our recovery mix, but you have cocoa, you can use that as your recovery drink.
Oh, gotcha.
Right? I mean, what's important in recovering is the sugar content. is the calories that you're fast tracking, as well as the hydration. What you're missing from your packet of Swiss Miss, though, is you're missing the sodium, right? You're missing the protein, right?
Right. Protein was something I wanted to ask you about.
Yeah.
I've heard all sorts of ratios for what's the best for recovery. And a lot of people espouse the 4 parts carb to 1 part protein mix. And yours is quite a bit more carb to protein.
Yeah, actually ours is 4 to 1.
Is it 4 to 1?
It's 4 to 1. So we're on the same track. And
was there a second mix? Is
initially
it a different mix now?
The mix that I was using for guys in the Tour de France was about 5 to 1.
Okay.
So a little different than what we sell now. So 5 to 1 for me in a Grand Tour is really important to push that carbohydrate up a little bit because they are burning more calories.
Right.
But 4 to 1 for me is more appropriate for the general athlete.
Okay.
So it's a slight change in that ratio, 5 to 1 versus 4 to 1. But I think 4 to 1 hits it. And 4 to 1 hits it when you're talking about glycogen resynthesis, when you're talking about maximizing refueling. Having some protein along with your carbohydrate does help to fast track glycogen resynthesis, right? So having a little bit of protein to help to rebuild muscle is important. A damaged fiber is not going to hold as much glycogen. So having some building block, but also mostly fuel can enhance how much you end up holding.
Gotcha.
I think that if you're talking about strength athletes, though, and talking about maximizing, muscle development, right? Your ratio is probably going to be 1 to 1.
Right.
You're going to be talking about, 20 grams of carbohydrate for 20 grams of protein. You still need the carbohydrate as a strength athlete because you need that spike in glucose to cause an insulin response. Insulin drives that sugar and protein both into the cell where it can now be used to build, right? And insulin ultimately is the most anabolic hormone in the body. So for a strength athlete, it's not just about protein, it's also about getting these insulin spikes.
Gotcha.
For a person who's not an athlete, these insulin spikes can be terrible.
Right.
They can, make you sleepy. They can kind of activate your parasympathetic nervous system and you get all drowsy. They put a strain on your pancreas, etc.
Right.
And that's kind of the difference. It's like everything that might kill you as a sedentary individual may actually enhance your performance as an athlete.
Yep. Wow, that's really interesting. Are the fruit drops the same sort of idea, just to provide sugar back in, provide insulin back in?
That's right. If you've ever seen a bonking athlete,
yeah.
But then that there's a purpose for our energy chews, right? And it's ultimately a carbohydrate supplement that is designed to paradoxically load up a lot of sugar into you without causing GI distress. And what people, I think, forget about digestion is that digestion is a multi-tiered process. It begins when you first see and look at food, and you start this kind of sending cues to the whole GI
makes
tract.
You salivate and all of that, yeah.
Then there's the chewing, right? Then there's swallowing this bolus. It goes into the stomach. The stomach is a reservoir, right? It's a place where you have acid and churning that continues to break and liquefy food. Nothing gets absorbed in the stomach. Things just get broken down in the stomach even more until you have a liquid that goes through or squirts through the pyloric sphincter and then trickles into the small intestine. It's at the small intestine that now this liquefied chyme gets transported into the body. And down through the bowels, that's where things that can't get absorbed, like fiber, water that hasn't absorbed in through, gets turned into fecal matter and ends up out your butthole.
Right.
For us, if you were just to drink all that sugar, it's quite likely that you're going to be dumping more sugar into the intestine than it can absorb. And anytime you get a higher rate of gastric emptying, anytime you empty something from the stomach at a concentration that is too high for the intestines to absorb, that's when you start to get gut rot. That's when you start to get this bad feeling, because after the small intestine, the only other place is out the back door. And that's the last thing you want to have happen if you're an athlete. And so with the Energy Chew, it has a form factor where it's effectively sugar, tapioca, and pectin. And that tends to decrease the gastric emptying. So when you load a bunch up in your stomach, it continues to slowly break down and trickle consistently into the small intestine.
Gotcha.
Right? And so for me, I prefer the chews, the solid form of food for getting consistent energy, over these highly concentrated carbohydrates. I don't think that concentrated carbohydrates are a bad idea, but what happens with highly concentrated carbohydrate drinks is you tend to have to pace yourself. You tend to have to drink it slowly.
Right.
All that being said, we continue to innovate and work and develop on things that can give athletes more energy without hurting their gut. And so we've got some cool experiments planned for this next year on that front.
Cool. I know one of the more recent products, the bars, very quickly became a favorite at my house.
Nice.
So tell me a little bit about those. What makes them, how should we be using them instead of just as a snack, or? Yeah,
I think they can be used as a snack.
Okay.
I think that they can also be used out on these long days when you need extra food with you and you don't have the time to bring real food. They're a substitute for real food. For me, I was always reticent to make energy bars because I always believed that making things from scratch was better for you and tasted better. And we wrote an entire cookbook to that end, the Feed Zone Portables.
Right. Which is a great book, by the way.
Yeah, I think it's an awesome book. The problem with having written that book was that we were getting all these people who bought the book asking us for an energy bar because as aspirational as making your own energy bars was, people didn't have the time for it. And I realized this was a problem. I also realized that if we could figure out a way to make an energy bar that I actually wanted to eat, that wasn't dry, that had the right texture, that was delicious, that made me think about wanting to eat it, then we would have a home run. And it took a long time for us to figure it out because there's the notion of making something in your kitchen. There's the complication of scaling a food product from a benchtop sample in your home to, thousands of units out into the world. And that bothered me a lot. What I love about our energy bar, if there's any kind of distinction from other energy bars, is that the same process that you would use to make this bar in your own kitchen is the same process we use at scale to make this bar. We just use bigger mixing bowls.
Much bigger mixing bowls. But it's a slab line bar, meaning it's a pressed bar. It's not baked. You mix all the raw ingredients together, and then you squish them into a pan. That's the process. And so our bar is a nut butter base, right? Which is delicious. And instead of, just using plain peanut butter, we're using almond butter, cashew butter, tahini. We're using nut butters that I would gravitate towards, that are more expensive, than say standard peanut butter. And then to that, to kind of air things out and create the right texture so that it still has a low moisture content but isn't hard to eat. We air it out with brown rice crisp, quinoa crisp, and sorghum flakes. Then we add a little bit of oat flour. Instead of using brown rice syrup, which gets all icky on your tongue, we use coconut nectar, which is a lot cleaner in terms of how it feels in your mouth, but equally as sweet and a good binder. A little bit of tapioca with that. And then you add inclusions for our chocolate chip. We add, almond chunks, chocolate chips, cranberries to give it some tartness. For our cherries and pistachios, it's just pistachio chunks and sweet tart cherries. And then I've always wanted a savory bar. I always gravitate towards salty and a little bit of spice. And so I wanted a bar that felt like I was eating ramen. That was umami. Right? And so we made our ginger miso, which is candied ginger, miso, soy, shiitake mushrooms, right? That one's delicious.
Yeah, red pepper. And when you kind of get oversaturated with sweetness, having that salty little bit of spice that wakes you up, it's freaking amazing.
Yeah,
And
it defies my natural sweet tooth,
yeah.
but I gravitate toward it.
Yeah,
So,
me too. So we were really proud of the process we went through. We're really proud of these bars, but we know that they're effectively bars,
yeah.
and that, bars have a time and place. So use your wisdom, right? Try not to eat them, but have them around for when you actually do need food.
Yeah. Cool. Well, unless you want to tell us a little bit about what's coming up in the future, if there's anything you can say without
Sure.
dropping all the secrets.
Well, the one thing I know about the future is that the future is the future.
It is.
It is definitive time that we're slowly bending and moving towards. The future holds some interesting stuff for us. We have a new flavor of energy chew coming out. I'm
Cool.
not going to say what, but it's so good it makes me angry. In fact, sometimes I'll when I was tasting them, I would chew some and I would just spit it out and throw it at people who worked here because it was so good.
It's a great working environment here at Skratch.
Yeah, exactly. When you spit up your food at your coworkers, you have a culture where you can say anything.
Yeah, totally.
We are finally, finishing up our rebranding. So it's important for people to know that we've gone through this whole new brand architecture. It's the Anytime Sport and Wellness, and we're finally finishing that up. So we'll have our what used to be our rescue hydration fully represented as our wellness hydration soon. We're going to double down on selling products. We have a full line now. We have the drink mixes. We have the energy bar. We have the energy chews. We have the recovery mix. All we need to do now is get out there, be active, have a ton of fun, and serve the athletes who got us here.
Cool.
So that's our plan for 2018.
Cool. Well, I'm looking forward to that and looking forward to helping however I can. So
Yes!
yeah, thanks, Alan. I appreciate you sitting down with me.
Yeah, you're welcome. Thank you.
I can honestly say that was one of the most fun and fascinating conversations about nutrition that I've ever had, and I'm still a little blown away that hydration can be so interesting. So big thanks to Alan for inviting me in and for taking the time. I know you've got a crazy busy schedule. So thanks for sitting down with me, giving me the Skratch Labs tour, and for having this great conversation. I think there's a lot here for people to learn. If you have not checked out Skratch Labs and you would like to, you can do that at skratchlabs.com. I suggest starting simple. Lemon lime. That's the way I go. I like the original flavor still. I have to. However, I also like that miso and ginger bar, and I really like the chocolate recovery. So scratch that. No pun intended. Don't start simple. Just jump in. Check it all out. Why not? Again, thanks, Alan. I appreciate that. You guys, be on the lookout for the schedule coming soon. I know that I'm going to be in Columbia, Maryland, April 6th to 8th. Speaking at the Performance Climbing Coach Seminar from Climb Strong with Steve Bechtel and Neely Quinn and Charlie Manganello and Dr. Tyler Nelson. So if you're thinking about coming out, get signed up now. You can save some money by getting signed up right away. Spots are going fast, so sign up and hopefully I see you there. If you're in the area nearby, you want me to come and check your gym out, do a workshop at your gym, hit me up. That schedule's going to fill up fast too, and I'm just planning on being out there for an extra week or so. So reach out, contact button on powercompanyclimbing.com. You can find us on the Instagrams and the Facebooks at Power Company Climbing. And you can go look for us on that Twitter machine, but you're not going to find us there because we don't tweet. We scream like eagles.
This time